Hello, everybody from around the world, hopefully listening to this podcast. We are pleased to welcome you today to our International Evaluation podcast, sponsored by the American Evaluation Association and the American Journal of Evaluation. I'm Zenda Ophir. I'm an international independent evaluation specialist from South Africa, and I'm currently based in Geneva in Switzerland.
Hi, and I'm Deborah Rugg, and I'm an independent evaluator, formerly an evaluation director with the UN Secretariat in New York. And it's my great honor to introduce today our new special section of AJE on international developments in evaluation. And we're really honored today to have two of our contributing authors to this new special section, John Atkinson and David Nabarro. Both are with For Sustainable Development, or 4SD as it's called, in Geneva, Switzerland. And especially David, I think many of you may know from his previous career with the UN, working to develop, originally being a grandfather of the Sustainable Development Goals, now serving as a senior food systems summit dialogues advisor, as well as, importantly for our times, a special envoy to the WHO Director General on COVID-19. So we're really fortunate to have both John and David with us today to talk about their article called Reflecting on Our Times, Valuing Transformative Leadership in Real-World Living Systems. So my first question is to David, and the article itself focuses on the challenges of evaluating the work of systems leaders as they address complex issues like the SDGs. So why is this important?
Hello, Deborah. Hello, Zelda. I want to start, if I may, by just reflecting on why it was that the Sustainable Development Goals were developed in the first place. If we look at what happened development-wise between 2000 and 2015, the world was organized around a number of particular goals and targets that reflected areas in which there were opportunities to make a big difference. As we moved into 2015, government said, actually, we'd prefer a different approach to development. Could we focus on the issues that really matter to people wherever they live? And so that led to the establishment of the Sustainable Development Goals. They're people-centered, interconnected, and universal. They require integrated responses, which involve partnerships. So this is complex work, dealing with tricky issues where the interconnections are often hard to fathom. And that means that a form of leadership is necessary that can take account of the complexity of the issues, can take account of the fact that multiple stakeholders have to be involved, and take account of the reality that the work they do is within different political contexts where power structures are not always easy to be assessed. For that reason, we suggest that systems leadership, putting the interconnectedness of the issues right at the front and center of work, is critical. And in my experience, working on the SDGs in recent years, this advice that I gave myself some years ago is now proving to be quite useful. Linear leadership can help, and can certainly help when you're dealing with a very fixed, specific problem. But in the interconnections with multiple actors engaged, systems leadership has to be the methodology of choice.
That is such an excellent message for our time, David. There could never be a better evidence, as you also indicated, of how important this is today. I was wondering, given that neither of you are evaluation specialists, which is one of the reasons why we actually included your article in our introductory session. We wanted non-evaluation voices to influence and reflect issues of importance that need to be brought into evaluation. I then wonder, John, if I can put this question to you. in being a systems leader and in the context that David just sketched, in the complex global issues that we have to deal with today. You have some interesting perspectives on the relationship between learning and evaluation. Can you share that with us?
Thanks, Zenda. Yeah, so the description that you've just given of systems leadership taking place in a complex global environment. What does complexity mean in this environment? It means that the link between our activity and the outcome may be hard to establish. There are many things going on, multiple actors carrying out all sorts of things with all sorts of intentions. And so what happens is this cause and effect gets dislocated in both time. Things happen much later or suddenly much sooner than expected. And they get dislocated in space. They happen in different places. There are unintended consequences of what we do, always. Sometimes they're unforeseen. Sometimes they could be entirely predictable. But we need to take that into account. The external environment is constantly changing. We've seen, as in work that we're doing on food systems at present, how people are rapidly having to adapt as COVID spikes and surges and swirls around the world. And so plans that existed beforehand are having to shift. But that's an extreme example. These things are always happening. So we're working in an environment that's constantly shifting. And the idea that we could set up an impartial post hoc evaluation of what took place is challenged by this. It says this is not necessarily going to be the case. So what's important is how can people who are trying to impact on the situation that we've described rapidly adapt and respond to what's happening in the environment so that they can make the best outcome that was achievable at that time, which may be much more than we expected when we started, or it may be rather less. And that means they have to learn very, very quickly. It's about creating feedback loops that enable people to rapidly change their approaches, their methodology, and their behavior. And that's where I think the line between learning and evaluation gets particularly blurred. We no longer see, I think, evaluation as something we do after a long project. It's something that's happening as we go along, and it's helping to inform the choices that systems leaders are making and helping them to develop and adapt and shift the method that they're using in order to address the problems that they face.
Okay, very good. So important for us as we're embracing now the post-COVID era, or actually still in it for so many. These complex issues require adaptive responses, as you're talking about. The starting point may be unclear or violently disputed. The desired outcomes may be contested. So what are the implications for evaluating these responses to complexity? What are evaluators supposed to do?
Well, Deborah, this is where it gets really tricky for all of you in your profession. And I think that's because the reality of life is quite difficult too. You see, I'm working a lot on food systems, and there is a group of people in our world who believe that they have the answer to what needs to be done to get food right. I mean, obviously, the answers that they come up with may not be agreed by everybody, but they're saying, well, if everybody could change what they eat in a particular way, then that would lead to a radical shift in the way in which food systems operate and their impact on the environment or in people's health. And they are also saying that what they've got to do is to take the recommended dietary shifts to scale and then make sure that these are adopted by hundreds of millions of people, and then that will be a meaningful result. Well, that's one way of looking at it. But Deborah, what I'm also seeing is that actually when we're working on food, there's always in any system multiple points of view on what the desired purpose of food systems should be. And these are often contested. And also food systems are changing anyway all the time. And so when we engage with them to try to shift them further, the starting point of our engagement may well be a bit unclear. And a food system has to adapt to the local context within which it's working. and they don't all behave in the same way wherever you are. So I'd suggest that evaluators, first of all, look at the degree to which those involved in a system agree on the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And secondly, the extent to which they are adapting to local settings, or whether they are going for a single widely dispersed response. If they are not adapting, and if they are not taking account of the fact that systems are changing anyway, then as an evaluator, you might want to say that you're not sure that a systems approach is being used here, and you can evaluate on other criteria instead.
When I listen to you, it is very clear that even people outside the evaluation space understand really well the kind of complexities that we have to deal with. And it is therefore really important we are grappling in the evaluation community with systems approaches to development, to what we do. And so all the comments that you're making is so spot on for the evaluation field. But I was wondering if you have a sense of whether there's enough agreement on good practice in systems leadership specifically for there to be a basis for evaluating systems leadership in ways that that are meaningful in development programs.
So that's a really good question, Zenda. I mean, I've over 25 years sat numerous times in groups of systems practitioners who have said, let's just agree the common dogma. What is it that we all say is the basis upon which we all work? And there are multiple perspectives on that. People will include some things in systems work, people will say that isn't it. And it creates always this sort of intense internal debate that's of no help, usually, to the people who've got the problem in the real world that you're trying to fix. So that's why in the article we spoke about the health of a system. What's the health of this system? Is it a healthy system is able to withstand changes in its environment. It's able to adapt to them in order that it can continue to live and to grow and to do the things that it's there to do. So does systems leadership enable this to happen? And I think if we get caught in the debates about, well, is this systems leadership or is that systems leadership? We may be doing something that's fascinating for systems leadership practitioners, but we're not helping people who have very specific problems. I heard somebody yesterday in a group I was with saying, well, the problem for my food system is farmers are being killed because of the security issues. And therefore people are not tending to the ground. A debate on systems leadership doesn't help them. How do we make that a healthy system is a much more interesting and valuable response. And so I think we do have enough about systems leadership. We know more than enough, but our approach to evaluating that is, are we making the system more or less healthy by the things that we're doing with it?
So David, when you're out and talking to these leaders in all these sectors, and I know you work in the public sector, in the private sector, philanthropy, governments, institutions, are you finding any interest by these leaders in assessing systems capabilities? And what kind of reactions are they having? And if so, what are your plans to follow up on some of this interest?
Oh, Deborah, thanks again for a lovely question to receive. Because yes, in the organizations that I work with, whether they are in business or whether they are international institutions like United Nations or civil society groups, I am finding a real thirst for exploring alternative approaches to leadership for dealing with complexity. And it's always some form or other of systems leading and systems working. And as more and more leaders are coming on board and saying, yes, we want to explore this, also, I feel I need to get better at explaining to them what systems leadership is and how it can contribute to the impact of their work. Fairly quickly, we move to a next stage in the conversation, which is, well, how are we going to introduce it in our organization? Who needs to be involved? Who needs to be briefed? How do we evaluate their performance? And that's where, of course, we're talking with you. because actually you can't really incorporate a new leadership approach into a large organization without at the same time thinking from the start how you're going to measure whether that leadership approach is working as it should do. So after we've come through some of the current sort of immediate things that we're working on, we're going to do stock take and then ask ourselves, can we establish some criteria that can be used to assess the leadership capacity of individuals who are involved in systems transformation? And we want to draw from the skills of the evaluation community to help us to find ways to actually codify and then assess these capabilities, even though we're actually finding it very hard to put systems leadership into a neat box and say it follows the following characteristics. I think it's something that we've got to invest quite a lot of time in. I think we've got to work with many different groups on actually trying to be sure that what we come up with is useful to them. But I think we'll have to develop a clearer set of criteria, because unless systems leadership capability can be evaluated in ways that make sense to those who call the shots or who pay the money, unless we can get it right, then it's going to be really hard for this way of working to be properly examined and, as appropriate, embedded into modern organizational practice.
Wow, you've really laid down an excellent challenge to evaluators. I hope many pick up the mantle here, read your article and get involved. Thank you.
And if I can add to that, thank you for what we in our introductory section to the section call a call to action for evaluators to focus on this area of work. And certainly I cannot imagine a time in history when good leadership and appropriate leadership that reflects the complexities that we have to deal with would be more pertinent and more important. And if evaluation cannot add sufficient value, it certainly is failing in its task to help cultivate the kind of leadership and accompany the kind of leadership and support the kind of leadership that we now need. So thank you very, very much for adding this voice, especially since both of you are not from the evaluation sphere primarily, being very well known in other spheres of work. It's so fantastic to have your voice in this space to help us understand how much we can do and should be doing and really need to do to support people like yourself who work in systems leadership and who are also prominent demonstrations of the value of systems leadership. With that, we have to come to the end of our podcast. To our listeners and watchers, I hope that you've enjoyed this opportunity to listen to these two voices, that you will take it to heart, and especially that you will take the opportunity to read the 4 articles, of which this is one, as well as our introduction. It will be available for 2 weeks, open access online to stimulate as many people's interest as possible. And we trust that you and your colleagues and friends will take the opportunity to have a look at the rich content in that section. Thank you for listening, for watching.